Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. For all the panelists and speakers, come and join on stage now. So, while my fellow panelists join us here today, I'd like to thank the speakers from the last session, because I thought that was excellent. It was concrete, and we were all anticipating getting up here for the last session with the energy low. But that's not the case. You really gave some excellent observations and information on the whole issue of risk financing, which is often overlooked. So our intention here today is to prove the maxim that good things come to those who wait. And we're the last session, and we really have 6 people here who are brimming with what I would call real life salty wisdom. And we're going to be talking about the tourism sector, a key sector globally, but very much a very key sector here in Asia Pacific. So I would like to introduce everybody here before we start our session. First, we have sitting just next here to me, Miss Hanna Maier. Thankfully, Hanna has released me from the responsibility of spelling out her organisation's title in full, but she is with GIZ, and she's with GIZ's Global Initiative on Disaster Risk Management here in Bangkok. Welcome to you, Hanna. Next to Hanna, we have Dr. Bijan Khazai, who is a senior research scientist at the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, KIT, and is founder of Risk Layer UG in Karlsruhe, Germany. And Dr. Bijan will talk about the main points of the Hotel Resilient Initiative. I heard him speak last month in the Philippines, and it's a treat. So we're very, very lucky to have Dr. Bijan here with us. Over on the other side, in no particular order, I'd like to welcome Mr. Mario Hardy, the CEO, Chief Executive of the Pacific Asia Travel Association, PATA, a non-for-profit membership organisation that promotes the responsible development of travel and tourism in the Asia-Pacific region. Mario, welcome to you. Next to Mario, Jayne MacDougall. Jayne has worked in the hotel industry for 16 years here in Asia and is currently the risk management consultant for the Meridien Phuket Beach Resort. And she's involved with task force responsibilities with Meridien as well as other hotels and resources when required. Welcome to you, Jayne. Next to Jayne, we have Miss Akiko Otani. And Akiko is the Managing Director of Ready Asia Pacific, based in Washington, D.C. She leads Ready's strategic efforts to advance disaster risk reduction and resilience programs in Asia Pacific. Akiko, welcome to you. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Masato Takamatsu, and he's the Managing Director and Chief Research Officer of JTB Tourism Research and Consulting Company, and is a leading expert in tourism crisis management in Japan. Welcome to you, sir. So I would just like to take 2 minutes to set the scene before I ask Hanna to be our first speaker. And this is a good news story that is about to be told in the next hour and a half. And why is that? Well, this is an initiative that is an opportunity for lives, livelihoods, and assets to be protected in what is a very important sector. And what we're looking to do is to strengthen current assets and operations in the tourism sector, but ultimately seeking to influence the whole investment planning and decision-making cycle and process, both in the public and private sectors vis-a-vis the tourism sector. So, in other words, it's speaking right to the heart of the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction 2015-2030, which is a roadmap, for want of a better word, to prevent the creation of new risk, as well as reducing existing risk, and overall to build resilience in communities, the private sector, and in nations. So it's a huge challenge, but the people here today to speak, they believe it's one that is very achievable. And if you just allow me to set the scene by quoting from a news story that's on the top of the news on ISDR's website, at least, and referencing the very recent tragedies in Ecuador and Japan. And the Special Representative for the Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, Mr. Robert Glasser, in response to those tragedies said, we need to build better in the first place. It's not just about building better after the event. And this build back better has become such a kind of catch cry, but I think that's an important observation, that it's actually getting it right in the first place, which is the key. And if you reflect on just one of the many tragic stories from those disasters of the last week, a family of 4 in Ecuador were killed in a hotel collapse, a 4-story hotel collapse, and one of them was a young lady who was about to embark on her medical degree course. So just one tragedy of many, related very much directly to the discussion that we're going to have this afternoon. So on that, I would actually like to ask Hanna to start the session and to give a brief introduction on the Hotel Resilient Initiative, and then we will ask Bijan to back that up. So please, Hanna, if you could begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. So really on behalf of the main partners of the Hotel Resilient Initiative, UNISDR, PATA, and the Global Initiative on GIZ, I would like to give really a short introduction to Hotel Resilient. So the initiative aims to improve disaster risk management and strengthen resilience in hotels and resorts, and through a trickle-down effect also in tourism destinations. And we try to do that by really building strong partnerships with the public, but also private sector that are working in tourism and disaster risk management. In addition to that, we have also established a really strong expert group from the public and private sector working also in tourism and disaster risk management, who helps us lead this initiative and guide us further. We have been raising more awareness for the topic to integrate disaster risk management in hotel management, and we've been promoting the initiative in several conferences in the region and also internationally. Some of the highlights include the ITB in Asia, also the World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction in Sendai last year. We've recently also published a study. It's called Developing Strategies to Strengthen the Resilience of Hotels to Disasters, and it clearly demonstrated that there are gaps in hotels' plans and procedures to look into disaster risk, and there was also a strong interest in actually having internationally recognized standards that look into disaster risk management and help to better prepare. So right now we're working on developing a so-called multi-hazard risk management standard module, and we do that in a participatory approach, working directly in the field. We have selected 2 destinations in the Philippines. It's Bohol and Cebu. And we do that to really ensure that there is acceptance by the industry and that the standard module is tailored to the demands of the hotels and resorts. And we've taken a stakeholder review with the public and private sectors. So some of the major components we have identified that are crucial to disaster resilience of hotels and resorts include a proper risk assessment, also preventive structural and non-structural methods, and also business continuity planning. And the focus for us is clearly on natural and technological hazards. And for the natural hazards, we're looking in climate-related, but also geophysical hazards. So looking at the next steps, we have developed a draft version of the standard module that we've been taking to the Philippines for 2 field trips already. And we had a stakeholder review. We're working on a revised version now that will be validated further in the Philippines in May. And we plan then to do a pilot to further test the standard module, also in other destinations here in the region, to have in the end really a standard that is globally applicable. And the standard module will be launched as an open source tool, so everyone would have access to it. And the Hotel Resilience Standard, it really aims to improve hotel management's understanding of disaster risk, but also the impact of disasters. It will help them to prepare more effectively to protect their guests and their staff. We do that in partnership with the consortium, an international consortium of universities and private sector agencies, which is led by the Karlsruhe Institute of Technology. And Dr. Bijan Khazai, he was with us in the Philippines, so I would like to ask him to hand over and provide some of the initial findings and provide a draft introduction to the standard module.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Hanna, and thank you for the opportunity to take you through a brief tour of this tool we're trying to develop called the Multi-Hazard Risk Management Standard Module. It's a standard, and it's called a module because it's focusing on multi-hazard risk. At the moment, geophysical climatic hazard, but you can imagine hotels are concerned about other types of risks as well. So that's this component that we're addressing. So this standard really has two related objectives. The first objective is to make it risk-based, and to make it risk-based based on fully probabilistic scientific modeling of risk, because that's what we can do now through the availability of open data, open models, and downscaling of that. We can really provide quality information on risk to hotels and resorts. And the other is to think about standards, a process for defining requirements of what safety systems should be in place, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, and what management processes and what are the requirements for these different management processes that lead to more resilient hotels and resorts. The three core criteria in the development of these standards is that they're open, meaning the standards and the methodology of synthesizing this information should be fully documented, open, available to everyone. It should be defendable, meaning if I go to a hotel and ask them what they think their flood risk is based on how far they think they're from the river and come up with a self-evaluation, and I go and ask that somewhere else and they give me a different answer, then I can't reproduce that. So that's where we want to bring in validated models. And also with respect to looking at requirements, so that the audit criteria should be objective enough that if someone is looking at that, they can provide an assessment based on guidelines and a structure that is clear and defendable. And the other really important aspect to this is that it should be marketable. And we talked about this quite a bit in the last 2 days, in the sense that it should be in bite-sized pieces, as we've heard others say. It should be simple, it should be clear, and ultimately it should add value. It should be economically viable for them to implement it, and it should match the level of skills available for someone to be looking at this and match the processes that hotels and resorts work with and relevant to that. This is a guide or a brief chart of how we're going about this, and we started in February 1st when this consortium came in to partner with GIZ in developing these standards. And there was obviously a lot of work beforehand, but within this first month, we put together an outline of what these standards could look like. And the standards, of course, have to establish some principles of what is a resilient hotel, develop an approach, a framework for how to evaluate resilience, how to evaluate risk and go from risk to resilience, and then a process for implementing standards. What are the audit criteria? What is the process for taking the standards and saying, okay, I comply and I'm aligned with it or not? So we created an outline of that, and the objective of our kickoff workshop was to introduce that, but then also we spent 2 weeks interviewing hotels and resorts in Cebu and Bohol. We'll go to Bantayan next time, to try to see if this matches the crisis management processes that hotels already have in place, and really validate that. The approach is participatory, meaning we looked at this with a number of stakeholders, including, of course, hotel and resort managers, but extended beyond that. And as Hanna mentioned, we have an excellent expert group working with us on this. So we have a a possibility on this not to work within a vacuum, but to have this at every stage validated. And the idea is by, and we'll have another workshop to bring the results of these field interviews and to draft this into not just an outline, but into an actual checklist and guideline items, validate that, and sometime this summer to produce a document, which would be the standard module and guidelines. And then, of course, this is just a pre-pilot we're doing in the Philippines. But the idea is for this to be international and to look at other pilot destinations and upscale and test it. I won't go through this long list, but again, here is where we want to rely on other standards that are there. And there's no point to recreate the wheel. There is lots of resilience-related standards in terms of risk management, business continuity, emergency management that are all related to this, but we have to think about how do we adapt it to processes of hotel risk management. So we're aware of that, and we're looking at these standards. We also want to build on existing initiatives within the hospitality industry that have looked at different parts of this and bring all of that as background information to inform ourselves. So in a nutshell, the methodology we are proposing, and we're still in the validation process of all of this, so please bear that in mind, it consists of 3 main categories: buildings, system, and management. And within this, we've defined subcategories, and in each one of these subcategories, we bring in standards. So the first step is really to evaluate risk, and for that, we need not just to know the hazard, but also the building vulnerability. And that's where we are not proposing someone to retrofit or go through these kinds of measures, but what we want to know is what is the existing condition of that building. And we are working with hotels and resorts. Resorts are set up very differently from hotels, so we have to collect a lot of general information about the geometry, layout, number of buildings, etc., that we're calling general information. Site, of course, is important, and they can be much more site-specific than we can when we look at hazard models. But then the modeling procedure has to come embedded into this. But we can ask questions like, how far away are they from a slope, and things of that nature. The grounds of the hotel is also important. You may have trees falling on buildings. What is the status of that? The design category has within it a bunch of elements that are related to the design of the windows, the shutters, etc. And then, of course, there's the structural and non-structural elements. And we tried to keep this as simple as possible, but still get meaningful information for a risk analysis. In terms of systems, we're looking at fire protection, and we separated that because every hotel will have a fire protection system. They're quite familiar with that. And then we're looking at critical infrastructure. That's the backup generators, water, whatever is a critical supply system or infrastructure within the hotel. Evacuation signs, and there's many other related items to evacuation. So everything that's a physical aspect here is under systems. Communication systems, emergency response systems, and environmental safety. And very important are the management processes. So standards should be defined, how roles and responsibilities are put in place, standards for training and drill, standards for disaster preparedness and response planning, evacuation planning, communication planning. And you can see business continuity planning is one sub-element of this. That's why I appreciated earlier that business continuity management really is an umbrella that includes much more. And often what hotels will call this is a crisis management plan. But we try to break this into some smaller components to make this more manageable. And I won't go through this, but you can see that each one of these subcategories then break down into individual standards. And for these standards, we define what would be the minimum requirements. So the methodology works like this. We have first the hazard model that's embedded into this. We model multi-hazards, and there's a scoring process that is provided. The scoring process relates to buildings because that's where we can pull in some of the site conditions of the hotel or resort. But importantly, it's put into the vulnerability screening. That's a whole building category where we ask questions about the structural, non-structural, etc. Once you have hazard and vulnerability we can get risk. So we come up with a scoring system for different hazards that is hazard specific for risk. And then we really want to put in place these minimum requirements. What are minimum requirements for resilient systems and management processes in hotels? And ultimately end up with a resiliency rating. This should be performance-based. That's the whole idea of doing this risk-based, is that you can, at the end of the day, look at different goals. And we are testing the acceptance criteria of this. Life safety is often a very important goal for any kind of design, any kind of performance-based design. For fire, for example, it's 1 in 100,000. It doesn't mean that no loss of life will occur in a catastrophic event, but a fully probabilistic model allows you to see how likely is that to happen. And we come up with this also in terms of usability. How usable is the building following an event? Might not be damaged, but the basement is flooded, or the utilities don't work and there's no backup power. And what is the recovery time? And for this, we have threshold criteria and a scoring system. And the idea is to put this via a software system that allows us to be quantitative, pull through the risk model, and combine the risk calculation with a step-by-step guided procedure for conducting these assessments, so that this isn't just a checklist that you look at the standards, but it's guiding you through the process. What do you mean by this question? And provide some pictures and examples and take you through it. The output could be looking something like this. This is one visualization. The hazard is a combination of the impact of the particular hazard and how likely, or a frequency. It's called a risk matrix approach, but those two dimensions allow you to come up with a scoring, and you can also look at what is a predominant hazard once you have done this, and in this case maybe floods is something they should be concerned about. Vulnerability comes through a vulnerability screening process by going through those categories, and then the risk scores are calculated via these 3 different performance categories. So you can start disaggregating your risk and thinking about your plan not to be generic, but to be event-based and for the most, most impactful events, most catastrophic events that you're likely to experience. And the idea is that if you fall under a certain risk score, if you're not implementing any of these resiliency requirements, this ultimately should lead to some kind of a certification, then you shouldn't be certified. But to be certified, then there are some minimum requirements to have to abide by, and this is where the critical functions of a hotel have to stand up. And then we also want to have a category where we find a lot of hotels, especially the bigger ones, are really doing above and beyond what we would consider a minimum requirement. And that's what we're calling exemplary action, and be rewarded for that through some kind of a credit system. So for example, you might have a communication plan, and you might have some minimum requirements in terms of how you're getting information on early warnings or weather conditions and disseminating that. But you may also have some really exemplary performance on that in ways that you get that information and disseminate it. And we want to stratify that and be able to rate that. The guidelines are supposed to put some flexibility into this. We don't want to prescribe, in the very detail what these minimum requirements should be, because we realize that hotels have different ways of doing things. Issues to consider or guidelines allow us to document examples of how this is. But the guidelines then inform someone if they don't do it. If they are doing something related to this, they can, for sure, the objectivity of the requirements should be clear enough that they say, yes, we're addressing this or no. Okay, I have 3 more slides to show, and then we looked at 18 hotels and resorts in Boho and Cebu, February 23 to March 8. And then we went back, a colleague of mine, Lee Miles from Bournemouth, who is looking at training needs in a field he's working in called entrepreneurial resilience in tourism, to look at what the training capacity and skills are in the same hotels and resorts. And these are some names of the hotels we visited, and the idea there was to go through the existing processes. They had experienced the Bohol earthquake, they had experienced the Haiyan, and what we really wanted to understand is how did they react to that? What did they learn through that? And through that sort of interviewing process, we got a lot of information about existing crisis management processes of hotels and where things work and don't. But we also wanted to go beyond the hotel managers to look at the stakeholders in a destination. We learned, of course, about the importance of the Chamber of Commerce, travel agents, insurance, LGUs, local government units. Hotels have associations that network very tightly together. This is at the local level, and at the national level, we spent a few days in Manila interviewing with national organizations, the Tourism Infrastructure Enterprise Zoning Authority, the Department of Tourism, to really get more context on all of this and be able to validate our process and our thinking. This is my last slide. In terms of what we're left with right now, and we have quite a bit of work still to do, there is a few lessons. I think I can boil it down. And it's very interesting because we talked about all of these in the last couple of days. Philippines is a special place to be working because they've had so much experience with disasters. So it was a real value for them to just, survive. And that may or may not be the case in other places where there is no or little experience with events that are experiential. But in the Philippines, we didn't really have to talk about marketing this very much because the idea is we need something that helps us be more resilient so that we can survive and get over this. There is a lot of information there. There are crisis management plans. Even in the smaller hotels that we looked at, we didn't look at very small hotels. We looked at mostly large hotels, but the independent hotels that are not part of big chains. It might be a 4-page crisis management plan, but it's there, and it's based on experience. So it's really valuable because they've gone through that, they sat together, and they came up with a plan. And in some cases, there is even a resilience team that is coming together. So there is a lot there, but often it's also ad hoc, in some ways random, and there is a real need for something more systematic, something that they can say, we abide by, you're aligned with this, and allows hotels to coordinate their thinking together. These standards should be globally applicable. That's the idea ultimately. But it's very important that they're not too strict because the main thing is to make them locally adaptable as well. So even if we met with Movenpick, for example, and they have standards that are given to them from corporate office, but they have the liberty, and this is what they do, they go and adapt that to the conditions of the Movenpick that was in Cebu. So putting place to interpret, locally adapt, is really important to this process. And keeping it simple. The tendency to do this in a more detailed way, because there is so much, and you always want to include everything you learn about, but at the end of the day, it has to be relevant, it has to be simple, and you want to do it more than once. And to do it more than once, you have to make it simple. So that's a challenge, but a really important criteria for us. And the last aspect to this is looking at destinations as a area where we should be thinking about implementation. There is 2 aspects to this. One, you can scale it much faster because when you do a risk model, you don't do it for a single building, you do it for a full destination. So you could then take the same risk model and apply it to multiple hotels across that. There's also trust. Once you have a champion within a destination who is taking up these standards, doing something about it, these destinations are often very networked together. They talk and they relate. So if you have someone taking this on, it's much more likely for this to grow within that destination. So focus on destinations, connecting with various stakeholders in that destinations, not just talking to hotels, is another important lesson I believe we've learned. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bijan and Hanna. Before I seek contributions from our other 4 panelists, I'd like to open the floor at this stage to see if there's any comments or questions on the Hotel Resilient Initiative. I see a hand at the back of the room. Thank you.
Hi, Tracy Hatton. That was describing an excellent project. Just one question to do with the lack of demand that tourism facilities experience after a disaster, and whether that is in any way being sort of factored into the planning and the thinking that you're putting into the project.
Did you hear? Yeah. So I think we just had a little difficulty hearing Tracy. Sorry, could you just repeat the question?
Sure. I'm just wondering if we know from Christchurch, for example, there's a lack of demand, and we're talking tourism destinations. The global media is full of the devastation and the destruction. They're not back again a month later to show you what is functioning. And I'm wondering whether that lack of demand is going to come into this planning process as well, as to how these hotels can overcome them being able to operate, but nobody wanting to come and stay.
Okay, thank you.
So what we found out was surprising, at least in the Philippines, is some of these hotels are places where people come to stay when they hear that, when there's a storm coming, because they trust that the hotel will have food, electricity, ready to go, and they're taking care of their more than they're at home. So, several hotels we interviewed had people come and stay and book, and they were fully booked. And then there is, of course, the people that come after such events that creates a demand. There's probably different experiences with this, and there's probably hierarchies of hotels that will be booked and others that won't. So it's a very interesting and good question. But that was an observation that was surprising for us, that demand doesn't necessarily go down. In some cases, it might actually go up.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more comments or questions? Yes, the gentleman over there, please.
Yeah, sort of related to that question there as well. What was the purpose of doing this? Is the aim to provide some measurement which is a confidence boost for the owner of a hotel, or is it for the tourism sector confidence of a certain area or a certain country, or is it meant to be something you can tell the customers so that they feel better about coming to the place? I'm sort of trying to think what that score or the measurement is going to give you at the end.
I can start this. We didn't talk about this because it's not really at that stage yet, but when this project started, as Hanna mentioned, there's an idea to certify hotels that meet by these standards. And that is the marketable dimension to this that we're testing, that if you can certify that you are resilient and have a plaque that demonstrates that, people might trust to come more to your hotel. And that's a hypothesis that we're testing, but that would be sort of if you think about carrots and sticks, that's the stick of it. And the carrot is, of course, it's a tool. It's nothing more than providing them with plans and ways of creating those plans that abide by, a system that has been looked at scientifically, internationally, and validated. So they're left with something and information on risk that they wouldn't normally be able to get. So that's the mechanism by which this is.
Yeah, certainly like a technical assistance or strengthening capacities of hotels, but as Bijan mentioned, we have heard some feedback in the Philippines also that the tour operators that often require some information on disaster risk management, and also insurance companies, they might actually be very interested to having something standardized that would help them to evaluate their hotels. So it could be a competitive advantage for hotels and resorts.
Okay, we'll just take one more question from the gentleman there. We will have time at the end if there are other points on this. Please,
thanks. Just a question regarding the scale that you are doing. You talk about crisis management, you talk about business continuity, but it's not demonstrated in the process. I give you an example. What happens if the laundry goes down? What happens if the restaurant in the hotel goes down? I mean, these are all the business continuity plans that is in, but I don't seem to see it within the standards or metrics itself. Can you comment on that?
So there is we have 6 areas within the management category, and one of them is a business continuity plan. You could call that whole thing a business continuity management, as you had outlined as the bigger umbrella. But we wanted to be specific also to key processes of hotels. So one of the important things that they have to do is evacuate, and there should be a management system for evacuation. which relates to business continuity, but it's a specific domain. Communication is a specific domain. So we tackle these on that level, and we also talk about business continuity. But I'd be quite interested in talking to you more, because you have obviously a lot of experience in this. And as I said, we're validating even the formation of these categories. So if there's a better, more straightforward way of thinking about this, I'd be very happy on that input.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bijan. So I'd like to bring in contributions from our other panelists now, please. And I'd like to start with Mr. Masato Takamatsu, please, if I may, sir. Particularly, I know you have experience from Kumamoto in Kyushu that suffered the earthquake last week, and as well as in Okinawa and in Japan in general. So if you could please share some of the observations of good practice from your experience in Japan. Thank you. As you wish.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, first of all, I'd like to express my greatest gratitude for your kind support and solidarity to Japan following the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011 and the recent earthquakes in Kumamoto. Well, yes, Kumamoto and the surrounding region is now experiencing major impact, negative impact in tourism sector. Not only the directly affected area, but the surrounding area, which has just had a minor effect, impact, was also suffering from the loss of the cancellation, huge number of the cancellation, because people are afraid to get closer to those places. But a very interesting thing I found out after I came to Bangkok, I visited one of the tour operators' office and asked if there is a lot of cancellation to Japan, and the store manager told me absolutely nothing. The Thai people are more eager to visit Japan if the itinerary includes the devastated area. They would rather still go to Japan and reroute it. Well, what a difference between the Japanese market and Thai market. Well, today I'd like to share with you some of the one of the initiatives that I've been working for the last 5 years. That is Okinawa Prefecture Tourism Crisis Management Initiative. The launch of this initiative was in 2011. That means that followed the Great East Japan earthquake and tsunami. And the prefecture of Okinawa, it's an island prefecture situated southwest end of Japan, and it's largely dependent on the tourism. Actually, the tourism generates 15% of the GDP in the region, and also 12% of the employment. So it is the largest industry for Okinawa. So for the government of Okinawa, it is critical to make this destination safe and secure from any potential crisis or disasters. So since the government observed the calamity in East Japan 5 years ago, they started the diverse activities, including the seminars and workshops to educate people, or installing multilingual signage for the international visitors, for the evacuation or even the elevation from the sea level, just in case of the tsunami. And also, they developed the kind of alert system for international visitors in 4 different languages. The prefecture, the recently developed Okinawa Tourism Crisis Management Plan, it is a comprehensive plan to prepare for and respond to the potential crisis that may have impact to the tourism sector. I mean, the tourists as well as the operators in tourism-related businesses. And the plan is based on what we call 4 R's of the disaster management, namely reduction, readiness, response, and recovery. And it is the first of this kind in Japan. And BCP, Business Continuity Plan of the whole destination, is the idea of this plan. This plan, even though it is the prefecture plan, but it encourages the municipalities within this prefecture and also the individual tourism-related operators to develop their own tourism crisis management plans and manuals that reflect their basic plan. And last year, we supported the development of plans for 2 municipalities and 2 industry associations. One of these municipalities was a small, very small island with a population of 1,200 people. But it is very well prepared when we got there and found out. Because everyone, even the citizens, nothing to do with the tourism, have a sense of kind of crisis management or disaster management, because each one feels the responsibility of protecting their visitors to the island. That was really a great experience to me too. And we also helped the bus association and taxi associations, as we have identified the bus and taxi operators are least prepared for a potential crisis among the tourism sector. You know, there was a discussion about the hoteliers. And most of the hoteliers, especially the major chain hotel, global chain hotels, they have comprehensive, perfect disaster management plan. But most of the bus operators and taxi operators are SMEs, and they needed help. They needed to be educated to develop their own plan to protect the passengers from any potential crisis or disasters. And for the development of the plans and manuals, we had a series of workshops inviting the managers of the actual players. And the idea for this is that, well, it might be easier to just, write down the kind of model manual among the experts and give it to them. And this is it. But we didn't want to do that because we really wanted them to make their own plan, their own manual, so that it's easier for them to accept and introduce in their operation. Otherwise, if that is something given from somebody at the top, they may say, another plan we're not interested in. Well, it's not our business. We're too busy to do any training or any drills for this. But this time, we, even though knowing that it may take a little bit longer procedure, we decided to invite the players in the field, frontline, to formulate the manuals, and that was very successful. And the workshop began with identifying the potential disasters, risks, and crises for their passengers, and for the drivers, and for their businesses. And then, after identifying, the list of the potential risks, the workshop members prioritized the list of the crises according to the likelihood of their occurrence and severity of the consequences. So they made a kind of matrix and spotted all the potential crises on the list. And finally, they came up with the typhoon, earthquake, and tsunami as a top priority. So we decided to start with those three disasters. And another thing that is very characteristic about this activity was that they proposed us to first make manuals for the drivers, not the managers. Because the drivers are the one who is in direct contact with the passengers in case of the emergency. So they decided that the first thing they need is the driver's manual to evacuate the passengers safely. The manuals that that developed was so practical that they instruct the drivers how to use the brakes safely when they feel the major shake of the earthquake, or and how they should support the evacuation of passengers with disabilities. How to use the wheelchair if there's no wheelchair, what do they do? And things like that. It was very, very practical because they did it. They knew what's going to happen to those passengers. So now that the two associations have the now manual, and they're planning this kind of seminars and training sessions and drills for their drivers. And initiatives and the series of the activities have been successful in raising awareness of tourism crisis management, not only to the tourism sector people, but also to the general public of Okinawa. They have a positive impact on the source market. And in the source market, a travel planner commented during tourism promotion roundtable with the governor that was held in Tokyo. And he said that we are very confident, that the travel planner said that we are very confident to plan group tours, especially the school excursion to Okinawa, because your prefecture has such a comprehensive plan for crisis management. The safety and security is #1 priority for the tour operators. And of course, the governor was very, very happy about that. So, as somebody noted, that the being safe and secure is really competitive, is an advantage in competition with other destinations today. Well, although the idea of tourism crisis management plan is very well accepted even among the citizens of Okinawa, there is still a lot of hurdles to implement it, among which are lack of budget and human resources, or a difficulty of breaking boundaries or silos of these relevant organizations. And that's the area that I still need to work on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Masato. Very concrete examples of engagement with SMEs, the importance of language. It's become a cliche to go the last mile. If people don't understand you, then you won't get there. And a lot of practical advice. Any comments or questions from those observations from Okinawa at this stage, please? Okay, again, we'll have an opportunity at the end. So maybe I'll just invite Ms. Akiko to draw on your vast experience of this region and its disasters, as well as your work on risk reduction and resilience. Please, if you could speak. You can stay there or come here as you see wish.
Okay, I can just speak here then. Okay, well, thank you very much for this opportunity to share what Ready Asia Pacific is doing in Phuket. So similar to some of the comments already made, our project in Phuket does take a whole destination approach, and we are focused on working with Phuket and all of their various stakeholders to really build their community resilience and resilience for any future disasters. Clearly, after the 2004 tsunami, a lot of the stakeholders that we're working with experienced that devastating event. And I think what our program does is really not only to work with the hotel industry and the tourism industry, but we really take that whole community approach to trying to strengthen resilience. And so we are working with a number of the key community stakeholders. So, of course, the hotels and those involved in the tourism industry, but we're also trying to, so we also work very closely with the local government authorities, and now working with the local academic institutions. Somebody had mentioned, that in terms of having the scientific foundation for, some of the hazard maps, risk maps, things like that, you need to have a research institute or a scientific partner. And so we are working with not only a technical partner in Singapore, the Earth Observatory Singapore, but also working in partnership with the local academic institutions, and then also working with some of the SMEs. So what our project is aiming to do is really helping to facilitate that communication, the collaboration, and strengthen the engagement of all the different stakeholders that are really key members of the community as a whole. And so we're trying to help bridge those, break down those silos between sectors, but also levels within the community. So you may have the governor's office up here, but it's really important to make sure that everybody at the different levels, from the governor's office down to the community-based organizations, are engaged. But I would also mention that within a sector, there's a lot of work to be done still in facilitating that communication, collaboration, engagement. So any one sector you take, for example, the hotels, you have the very large international hotels, and then you also have the local smaller hotels. And the communication between those kinds of players within a sector, the communication amongst them also needs to be strengthened and improved. So what our project is working on right now, which is a challenge, but also the driver, I would say, is really helping to break down those silos, helping to facilitate that enabling environment, so that those who have up until now, didn't speak to each other are now more comfortable to speak, share experiences, and that really then lays the foundation for helping them to work together to address their resilience. So aside from the community engagement part of our program, we also have a very scientific technology-focused part of the program. And that is where our partner EOS, the Earth Observatory Singapore, and their scientists are working on developing hazard maps, risk maps, vulnerability maps for the entire island of Phuket. And they're working in partnership with Thai scientists, their academic institutions, and the various Thai institutions that have access to the data. And ultimately, this map that we're working on will have layers as well. It will not only show where the hazards are and the risks and vulnerabilities are, but also we're trying to aim to map the assets as well. Where are those resources? And these maps are going to serve as a tool for the community members to use to test their own existing plans. So there are provincial, disaster management plans, there are hotel disaster response plans, etc. We would like to use these tools for these various stakeholders to use to test out how strong are your plans. And so on these maps, we do have various scenarios backed by historical and scientific data. There is an earthquake scenario, tsunami scenario, and these are very possible scenarios that will happen. And the key question is, does your plan today stand up to these potential scenarios? We're right now in the project, we're at the stage of trying to finalize some of these tools, and simultaneously working on the community engagement part. Next step will be to conduct some of the workshops that Masato has talked about, bringing these stakeholders together. And we've already had one initial workshop back in December where Jayne actually was also part of. But we would like to engage more and more of the key stakeholders within the community and bring them together and not only introduce the tool, but how it can be used or how it could be beneficial to them, what more do they want, and really get the stakeholders engaged in that whole process of planning and enhancing their own resilience, really motivating those small and medium-sized enterprises to make sure if they don't have BCPs, we help them to get those in place, and hopefully these tools that we're working on will also be helpful in kind of providing them the motivation and incentive to do that. So I'll leave it there for now. Thank
you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Akiko, touching on the importance of engagement, again, a whole of society approach, if you like, for tourism resilience. Highlighting public-private sector partnerships, again, it's one of the real key connectors to point out or remind to private sector colleagues that roads, power supplies, utilities, these are the lifelines of all businesses, including the tourism sector. It's important to work together on those. And the balance of approach, software and hardware, people and technology, not one or the other, is also very important, as you highlighted. Does anybody have any follow-up questions or comments for Akiko, please? Okay, so maybe keeping with a Phuket theme, Jayne, could I ask you to follow up from that, please? Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you, Andy, and it's a great pleasure to be here today. And I am based in Phuket. I work at Meridien Phuket Beach Resort, but also cover some other resorts in the work that I do. I think all of you know that hotels are businesses, and so their objective is to make money. And that is the focus that hotels have. Hotels are by nature very well resourced. They have, depending on where they are, they have great equipment. They have specially trained people, so they have specialist human resources as well. And they can often operate like small cities and be quite independent. The smaller the hotel, probably the less access they have to some of these areas of expertise, and people tend to generalise in the work. Instead of them doing one specific task, they might cover a number of tasks, and they might have more limited resources. So just talking about our hotel and our experience, in 2004 we were severely affected by the tsunami, and our sister hotel in Khao was devastated. I was working there at the time in Phuket, and we had crisis plans and we had a lot of things in place at the time. We did find, though, that after our experience we developed much better systems. We learned a great deal from the experience, and that's a very good time to introduce programs of education and other activities. So as a result of what happened to us in 2004, we find now that we're much better at collecting and managing data and making sure it's backed up and secure. We're much better at incident management systems, and we also have much better training and a greater focus. So this starts off from the training. We do a lot of training. Training. After we do trainings, we do drills, and we do tabletop exercises, and we do scenarios. We do a huge amount of this kind of work. The way that our system runs, it's simple to implement. And what I would like to say, I was asked to say some of the strengths about the way that our hotels are able to manage what they're doing. And I think the main strength is that the way that we're able to do crisis plans is very simple to implement. It's very cheap to maintain a lot of times because we have most of the ingredients of what we need already available. The thing that is essential is commitment from the top. So that's either commitment from a general manager level, or if it's a bigger hotel, from a regional level, or somebody who has authority within the organisation. It's also important that there are designated people that carry on this task. And in my role, I've been a bit fortunate is that I've been involved for years, and so I've been able to follow things through. But a part of my role too has been teaching others what to do and mentoring them and monitoring them and supporting them as they grow and they develop and they take more responsibility. So it is important to invest time in the training and in the preparation activities. I think a lot of the speakers have also talked today about how the time before something happens is the most important time. And there are really tedious day-to-day activities that need to be done. The printing out, in our case, of guest lists by date, by departure date, by room number, by surname. These need to be done twice a day. Associates or employee lists, printing these out routinely. Monitoring your walkie-talkies, what status they're in. There's a multitude of really boring activities that need to be done on a regular basis, but they're essential to happen so that you are prepared when something goes wrong. So I think with commitment, any hotel, whether it's a large hotel or a small hotel, can reduce their losses and have a much faster recovery in a disaster. The small and medium hotels, if they're given access to the tools and the specialist advice, if they understand the benefits of what can be gained by being organised, and if they're willing to invest the time, because as I've mentioned, a lot of it is time. If they're willing to do that, they can increase the resilience of their property and in turn the local community. But part of this process is also working with the community, because naturally in all our plans we need to have a backup command post if we need to shift command post for some reason. If we need to evacuate our guests, we need a reciprocal agreement with another hotel. We need to work with the police to make sure that when we call them, they're going to come. So these are the kinds of things too that a good plan is going to take into account. So finally, hotels that have a more developed system, they also, I think, need to find ways to reach out, and they need to support others in developing their own disaster risk reduction and the community resilience. This is a form of corporate social responsibility. It needs to be developed further, and I'm involved in a couple of projects that help move in that direction. I think it's really important, and I'd just like to finish with a quick example of something that we've done because we can. So 1999, we have people who are really good at life-saving, and we bring trainers every year over from Australia to train our hotel. By 2000, we decide we can do more. Let's get people in from the other hotels and train them in life-saving. By 2002, we decide that we should be teaching kids how to swim because there's too many drownings on this island. And then by 2003, we established the first ever lifeguard club in Phuket, Phuket Lifeguard Club. A few years after that, one of our team members left and he established Phuket Lifeguard Service, which runs all the lifeguards on the public beaches. And it continues to grow and it continues to develop from initiatives started at a hotel. So big things can happen with just a little spark. And yes, thank you very much. We look forward to lots more cooperation, and it's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayne. It is a good news story to tell, and very well told. And I think it was wonderful to hear that learning from experience. These things don't happen by chance. I think we have representatives from Japan, a global example of a country where memory triumphs over forgetfulness in terms of how to learn from disasters and make people and communities safer. I think it's great to hear that, and also you are from a bigger organisation, but a clear message that SMEs in the tourism sector can do this, and we heard from Hanna and Bijan earlier on that, and the importance of preparations. It doesn't happen by chance. Any follow-up questions or comments for Jayne, please? Okay, thank you. So maybe we'll zoom out of Phuket to an Asia-Pacific perspective. Mario, sorry to keep you waiting, but please, it'd be great to have some of your maybe more regional perspectives to share with the group. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is it working? All right, good. If you don't mind, I'll walk around and stand because it's late in the day, so when you prep. I suspect there's many of you who actually probably don't know PATA, the Pacific Asia Travel Association. So just briefly, we are a bridge between public and private sector. We have 97 destinations who are members of PATA. All right. That might be a little bit better. Is it better? Good. The Pacific Asia Travel Association is now 65 years old this year. We have 97 destinations who are members, government institutions, and we have over 850 corporate members from the travel and tourism sector. So we're in a good position to represent actually both sides of the industry. And our role is really to bring everybody around the same table and have meaningful discussions about issues and challenges within our respective industry. How many of you here are from Thailand? Please stand up. Let's do some exercise a little bit. Everyone from Thailand, please stand up. Bert, it's okay, you can stay seated. Thank you. Stay up for a second. Have you noticed every day the number of actually tourists around you? Seems to be a lot more, isn't it? How many tourists do you think Thailand had in 2015? 30 million. How many do you think we will get in Thailand by 2020? 49 million. You can sit down. For those of you who are from Indonesia, please stand up. Assalamu alaikum. How many tourists in Indonesia last year? 10 million, almost. How many by 2020 is your minister hoping to get? 20. He wants to double in 4 years. You may sit. Those of you from Japan, please stand up. That's it? Your Prime Minister actually announced just a few weeks ago he has some very ambitious plans. By 2020, they want to achieve 40 million visitors. They're at 20 at the moment, double by 2020. That's really brave. Wish you luck. Please sit down.
Thank you.
One last one. Anyone from China?
Nobody.
China? No? Okay. For your information, China outbound travel last year was 120 million Chinese traveled overseas. There are 280 million Chinese that can afford to travel overseas, that have the means to travel. That means there's 164 million that have not traveled yet. That's a lot. So by 2020, the number is expected to rise to 200 million Chinese that will be traveling overseas. Some analysts think that's even actually low, it might be even greater than that, because the middle class keeps increasing all the time. For those of you who did not have a chance to stand up, you may stand up any time you want. Now, why am I quoting all of these numbers? Why is it important? The numbers of tourists around the world, and specifically in Asia Pacific, is increasing at a really fast pace. The average growth rate is expected to be about 4.1% year on year. In some countries around this region here, it's double-digit growth. And some islands in the Pacific are also double digits, but they start from a very low base. It's important to know because when there's a disaster, there's a risk of having a lot more tourists being affected. And what is the one thing that the media like? If a tourist gets affected in a disaster, it's on the front page of the media. So it's important for us to actually pay attention. So I was very interested with everything that was shared today, specifically this afternoon, in relation to the tourism sector, and what is actually being done to get prepared for it. For many, many years, PATA has organized task force. I'm really pleased that we have one of our members here, Bert van Wilbeck, in the back. And I know Masato actually helped in many projects too. We've been helping destinations in recovery. And late last year, Bert and other colleagues actually went to Nepal to help them with the recovery. Traditionally, we've been helping destinations after the disaster. Help them with communications with the media when it happens, and the weeks and the days after that, but also helping them in remarketing themselves to get back on track to get the same level of tourists. The company I worked with before I joined PATA, we did a research a few years ago. It's a couple of years old now, but still relevant, of how long does it take for the tourism industry to recover after a disaster. And we looked at different types of disasters. And it was very interesting to find out that natural disasters, depends on the scale of it, of course, tends to take about 3 to 6 months to recover. When I say recover, globally, not particularly that destination. If it's a political crisis, it's an average of maybe 6 to 12 months. But there are a few events, there are actually two, actually that took much longer than that. One is 9/11. Took 3 years for the industry to get back to the same growth level they had before. The second was the financial crisis, 2008-2009. Took 3 years globally for the tourism industry to get back to the same growth they had before. So the question is not about if we will have another crisis. The question is when, and are we prepared for it? So in recent years, with the help of some of our members, we've now actually started to spend a little bit more time and focus on getting our destinations and our corporate members prepared for that next crisis, to make sure they have the communication plans that you've mentioned before, that they've got all the resources in place, that the hotels are prepared, their walkie-talkie and everything else is ready, but having a plan. Do you have a plan? Are you ready for that next crisis? Is your staff prepared for it? Are your people, do you understand the expectations? And what do you do? What happens? What do you do on the day it happens? What do you do the day after, the weeks after, and the month after to get back on track with your business and getting a tourist back on site? That is a very key role that we play here at PATA with our membership to ensure that we help the destinations, our members and our corporate members, to not only being prepared, but also recover after the disaster. Some of you might have seen me in the media when there was a crisis here in Thailand last year and a year before that. And that's also one of the roles that we play. Myself, our chairman, and other board members of PATA would also be active in communication with the media to make sure that we actually portray the real sense of what is going on the ground. Unfortunately, media tends sometimes to over-dramatize what's happened in the destination and don't really display the real fact of what happens. You know, when there were the floods in Thailand, it was the entire country that was flooded. No, actually it was one street. It was one area of the city, not an entire country. And there's many, many stories like that that actually needs to be reflected. So if there are media in the rooms, I encourage you, please make an effort to portray the reality of what's going on in the destinations when there's a disaster. Because your message goes really strong, and it affects actually the life of the many, many people that works in this industry. And the industry is beyond just hotels and flights. It's people making craft in the villages, it's people working in bars, it's people working in restaurants. It goes far, far beyond just the hotels and the flights. We call this the visitor economy. It affects many, many people within a destination. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mario, for injecting such style and substance at this stage of the day and reminding us of the dramatic role the tourism sector has in Asia Pacific with such impressive growth. 49 million tourists due to be in Thailand by 2030 and many other countries around Asia Pacific as well. And the emphasis on the importance of planning in peacetime, if you like, rather than just focusing on response. That's a very strong message from all panelists. And that point that it's better not to be hit in the first place, it's better not to be disrupted or closed in the first place, because it's always that much harder to bounce back if you are. Is there any points specific for Mario? And I'll also open the floor for questions and comments to any of the panelists on what you've heard in the last hour and 20 minutes. Would anyone like to pose a question or add a comment to the discussion, please? Okay, maybe I will get the ball rolling. Bijan, Hanna, if we're sitting here at the Asia Business Forum 2017, what are the key messages are you going to give? I mean, we heard about your tool seeking to be open, defendable, marketable, the focus on building systems and management, looking at minimum and exemplary standards. Is this still going to be conceptual as a tool, or is it going to be out there being used?
It's a great, difficult question. In terms of what we're planning to do and where we're at, is to make this an operational tool. That's fully the purpose of this, and that's why there's a software system designed to go behind it, and a lot of thinking in terms of development of that and where it could go. Where we're exploring is the uptake of that. And one challenge, and I think Akiko really went into this when she talked about destination level and all the work that's required for that, particularly when it comes to risk analysis. Risk analysis is not a trivial thing. And you know, you've organized a group of research institutions to help you do that in Phuket. And to really scale this, do we have that opportunity each time to work with partners to provide risk input that is credible? And that's a process where we're very optimistic, because we see an opportunity with the availability of global multi-hazard models and data becoming available, and downscaling some of that with local data and providing that as a tool to allow this process to scale. So I'm hopeful that 2017 will have done enough pilots beyond the Philippines that we get a good sense of what's a methodology that works, and that there will be uptake.
Good. I agree with you. So unless I see any other hands, I'm going to ask the final question, and it's to Jayne, and she will give a short answer because she has to leave at 5 o'clock for her flight. Jayne, you talked about the key element is management commitment. How do you get that?
How do you get management commitment? That's a big question, isn't it? I think you get it when you have managers that have had experience of dealing with crises before, and they've learned from those experiences, and they understand how important it is to be prepared in advance. So that commitment comes from people who've in some way been affected, I think, in the past, and make it their commitment to put things in place that may cost money, but may have benefits in loss prevention.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to close the session and invite you please to join me to thank Hanna, Bijan, Masato, Akiko, Jayne and Mario for sharing your wisdom, your great experience on what is an interesting but also very important area, and thank you very much for that excellent session. Thank you.